Hello and welcome. I am Chakshu Roy and you're watching Laws in the Making on Rajya Sabha TV. Today on the show, we are discussing the Anti-Maritime Piracy Bill 2019. To discuss the bill, I have on the show with me Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha, Security Analyst, and Captain Alok, Bansal, Director, India Foundation. The Anti-Maritime Piracy Bill 2019 was introduced during the winter session of Parliament. The bill provides for stringent punishment for piracy-related crimes. It intends to ensure safety and security of India and maritime trade, including the safety of vessels and crew members.
India ratified the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea Agreement in 1995, but does not have a domestic anti-piracy law yet. In the absence of a piracy legislation, pirates apprehended by the Indian Navy and Coast Guard are prosecuted under the provisions of the Indian Penal Code pertaining to armed robbery and the admiralty jurisdiction of certain courts. The proposed bill makes piracy on high seas a punishable offence, with life imprisonment or even the death sentence in some cases.
In the last few years, thousands of the crews have been killed, assaulted and taken hostage. Previously, these attacks on the ships were limited to the West Coast Africa and the Somali coastal waters and the Gulf of Aden. But now these attacks have been expanded towards the east and across the Indian Ocean. All crew or the seafarers sailing through the Gulf of Aden and North Indian Ocean are always at the risk of piracy. This is affecting the shipping industry in terms of the cost and other risk factors, and operators now face rising insurance premiums and employ private security personnel. So this bill is introduced to prevent the maritime piracy and prosecution of the persons which are doing or they are related to the piracy related crimes.
The bill makes the offence extraditable and specifies punishment for attempting to commit piracy. It also provides for presumption of guilt under certain conditions. The law will apply to all parts of the sea adjacent to or beyond the limits of the exclusive economic zone of India, which is a zone to which India has exclusive rights for economic activities.
There were several laws which have been dealing with these issues previously, like the Admiralty Court jurisdiction, the Indian Penal Court, the Navy and Coast Guards, their rules and regulations, several old rules and regulations and laws which were dealing with that situation. But you will be surprised to note that even the IPC did not had the definition of piracy per se within the code. So therefore the current bill becomes very, very important.
The bill defines piracy as any illegal act of violence, detention or destruction against a ship, aircraft, person or property committed for private purposes by the crew or passengers of a private ship or aircraft. These acts may be carried out on the high seas or in any place outside the jurisdiction of India. Inciting or intentionally facilitating such acts and voluntary participation in the operations of a pirate ship or aircraft would also qualify as piracy.
The incidents of piracy are increasing day by day. Admiral Sinha, I wanted to start the program with you and ask you, what is the background in which this bill has been introduced in Parliament?
We tend to forget that the first pirate ship, which was sunk by any Navy or Coast Guard in the world, was by Indian Navy. When INS Tabar in the year 2008 sank one pirate ship off the coast of Somalia, maybe just a little bit northeast. And thereafter, the pirates were captured and they were brought to, books. But unfortunately, what happens is that our Indian Penal Code and Criminal Penal Code is applicable. Jurisdiction is only up to the territorial water. And therefore, very often the case came or the matter came to judiciary and they said, how you have arrested the so-and-so person in so-and-so place. How does he be penalized under the Indian Penal Code? So there was a big hurdle. The second issue was that one is of that of jurisdiction of this applicability. The second issue was that the pirates who were captured, they were speaking a language which nobody seemed to know, and they were all there's no nationality. So why should an Indian law be applicable on them? So this is a very path-breaking law which is in making. Later, the owners of the pirate boat, they went to the World Court, to the ICJ, and they wanted to claim, the salvage money and etc. etc. So our lawyers had a very difficult time. Fortunately for us, the Navy Act or the Regs Navy permits the commanding officer of a ship to fire in self-defense, which it was, and therefore the court went by the regulations of the Navy and not the Indian Penal Code. So this is the background under which this has been made, and I think that it's a very good thing to happen and it should become an act soon.
Okay. Mr. Bansal, one of the things is obviously security related issues, but maritime trade is a big issue. I was reading somewhere that 90% of the goods that are transported in the world are actually transported on ships. So what is the implication for piracy on maritime trade?
See, we need to understand that maritime piracy is as old as maritime trade. In fact, during the colonial periods, many of the colonial powers actually patronized pirates. Francis Drake and all, who was knighted, was actually a pirate. These were actually pirates who were in the payrolls of who were actually pro a particular country and looting the ships of other countries. So, in the past, maritime piracy was extremely prevalent. Now, what happened is when you had to deal with maritime pirates, you needed to deal with them, you need to have certain jurisdictions, certain courts. The British used to have admiralty courts, which had jurisdiction over maritime domain. During colonial period, we also had 3 presidency towns had the Admiralty Court, Mumbai, Calcutta, and I think Chennai, then Madras. So, but what happened is post-independence, when this sort of issues started coming up, when you would arrest, apprehend pirates, because please understand, pirates operate generally in waters which are beyond the territorial limits. So, where actually the territorial laws of a country are not applicable as far as the normal conventional laws are concerned. They are usually even beyond the contiguous zone. They are either an exclusive economic zone or even beyond, which are actually not the jurisdiction of any country if you go by the international definition of laws. And now what would happen is when you apprehended a particular pirate and brought them, the question arose as to whose jurisdiction it is. Because firstly, the crew or the pirates belong to a certain country. The ship in which they were committing piracy belonged to some other country, and the ship against which they were acting often belonged to a third country. The captain of that ship had another nationality, its crew had different nationality. So there was a very, very complex question, and there were certain cases where Indian courts often ruled whether the court had jurisdiction to try these issues. Because invariably you will realize that most of the Indian courts derive their jurisdiction from the jurisdictions of their respective high courts. Now, the jurisdiction of respective high courts is dependent on the jurisdiction of the state. Now, state boundaries are actually the land boundaries plus the territorial waters. Beyond territorial waters, the state's boundaries do not extend. And that is where the question arose as to who will try them. And there were a lot of cases where hardened criminals had to be let go because there was no way that you could actually charge them.
Okay, Admiral sir, jurisdiction is a very interesting issue. Land jurisdiction is determined because it is determined by borders. How does jurisdiction get determined in sea? And is it only, the extent of the sea which is close to you, or does it extend beyond that also?
See, as far as this IPC and CRPC is concerned, the jurisdiction was only up to territorial waters, which is considered as an extension of land.
So that's how long is that?
It's about 12 nautical miles.
12 nautical miles.
And each nautical mile is about 1.8 kilometers or so. So let's say 24 for ease of reference. Beyond that is contiguous zone, which is up to 24 nautical miles. And the economic exclusive zone, in which you can do all the economic activities.
Fishing.
Like exploration, fishing, seabed mining, etc., etc. And beyond that is all high sea, like Alok Bansal just mentioned. So this is how jurisdiction is made. Now, in fact, if you go in the court and you say that, so-and-so was in my territorial water when he committed the offense, and that is why you are trying it in so-and-so court. Now, there was always a problem. From the time the GPS has come, it has become slightly easier. Otherwise, you had to go by fixing the position by, very primitive methods on the chart. and the ship which has committed the crime, he would always say that he was not in your territorial water. In fact, one of the reasons how the Italian marine case, turned out, it is because that the Italian marine ship was, while it was just about outside territorial water, the fishing boat was just about inside the Indian water. So they just didn't know. The complexity kept increasing, and therefore, the Supreme Court and everybody found it very difficult to handle it. But now this really defines, and I think it's a very model act. Once it comes into being, my sense is that every country in the world should have a similar, law, so that the pirates don't get away. In fact, Kenya has got a pirate home because the people who have been caught, arrested in piracy, acts of piracy, they are jailed in Kenya, and the money is paid by the United Nations. In fact, now Kenyan government has said just about few months back that kindly take them away. I don't want your money. But what to do with these people? There is no law under which he can try them out. You see.
Okay, Mr. Bansal, an interesting point. There's no law to try them out. Now, this law extends the jurisdiction of Indian courts and extends it beyond India. So, what exactly is the law doing there?
See, firstly, we need to understand when we are looking at jurisdiction at sea, there are different gradations. Like as Admiral Sinha said, territorial waters is where virtually all laws of the country are extendable. But even in territorial waters, please understand there is a right of innocent passage. A third country ship can come and pass through it without being challenged, without anything, and it can do. And you cannot go inside the ship and ask for anything unless, of course, there are grounds for it. So that is as far as territorial waters is concerned. When you go to contiguous zone, which is up to 24 nautical miles, your fiscal and customs act are applicable up to 24 nautical miles. And when you go to 200 nautical miles, which is exclusive economic zone, you only have rights as far as economic exploitation is concerned, that you cannot you can take charge of any other vessel which is indulged in economic activities like fishing, underground seabed mining or things like that. Now actually it has been further extended. There is something known as continental shelf, which again they are doing it, which will go beyond 200 nautical miles, where you can still have the rights as far as exploration of undersea resources is concerned, but there will be no restriction as far as fishing is concerned. But what this particular act does, that is Anti-Maritime Piracy Act, is that it extends the jurisdiction even beyond these seas into the high seas. Because please understand, maritime piracy is happening in a dynamic environment. You may start chasing a particular ship from somewhere else, you may board that ship somewhere else and take
end
it
up
to
somewhere
a
else.
third.
Absolutely. But, that's an interesting discussion, but it's time for us to head into a break. When we come back, we will discuss the punishment of the piracy and the presumption of guilt and extradition provisions. Welcome back. On the program today, we are discussing the Anti-Maritime Piracy Bill 2019. The bill provides for prevention of maritime piracy and prosecution of individuals of piracy-related crimes.
Anyone committing an act of piracy will be punished with imprisonment for life or death. If the act of piracy includes attempted murder or causes death, an attempt to commit, aid, abet, or procure for an act of piracy or directing others to participate in an act of piracy will be punishable with up to 14 years of imprisonment and a fine.
Now, the Anti-Maritime Bill covers any legal act, which can be, we can see in conjunction to the Anti-Hijacking Act 2016. In general, this bill is for the shipping and maritime piracy, but also to violence, detention, or the destruction committed against a ship or an aircraft. This includes the ship or aircraft which is either intended to be used for committing any act of piracy or has been used to commit an act of piracy and is still under the control of the person guilty of such act.
The accused will be presumed guilty if the accused is found to be in possession of arms, explosives, and other equipment which were used or intended for use in committing the offence, or if there has been evidence of use of force against a ship's crews or passengers, and if there has been evidence of the intended use of bombs and arms against the crew, passengers, or cargo of a ship.
It is the norms of the current definition are very similar to that under the United Nations Convention of Laws of Seas. Why they have been kept similar is for ensuring that there is international acceptability and cooperation from all the countries. Second, since there is extradition now also recognized under the bill, so that again becomes very supportive, and we need that kind of support from other countries. The very other important provision that they have added in our bill, which is not there in the in the UN clause, is that they have added a section allowing any act which is done which is piratical in nature. That has also got added as an addition part other than the UNCLOS regulations.
Under the bill, offences will be considered extraditable. This means that the accused can be transferred to any country for prosecution with whom India has signed an extradition treaty. In the absence of such treaties, offences will be extraditable on the basis of reciprocity between the countries.
Admiral Sinha, I wanted to extend the discussion further. We've talked about piracy, we talked about jurisdiction. So how does the bill actually define the crime of piracy?
Like it was just mentioned just now in the background, that piracy they have defined as any act of violence, illegal act of violence, or detention of another ship by people who do it for meeting the private ends, for their own personal gains. And it can be committed by another ship or maybe another aircraft, because sometimes the pirates might get dropped by the helicopter. So it takes provision of that as well. That is number one. And secondly, this passenger ship on which this act is being committed, it could be not necessarily flying the Indian flag, but if that ship has asked at sea, or the government has asked for the Indian government to provide any help in seizing the pirate ship or taking any action, so even those kind of private ships are also under the jurisdiction of this. So I think that it has widened the scope, and rightly so, because many times we have merchant ships being convoyed through the Gulf of Aden, through the Red Sea, and they come into the Arabian Sea where the piracy acts have been taking place. A large number of warships are moving around, and they always do a coordinated patrol, meaning that it could be anybody's ship, it could be apprehended by any of the warships. So the Indian law permits that whenever an Indian ship is preventing this or arresting the pirates or whatever action they are taking to prevent the act of piracy, that will come under the jurisdiction of the Indian government.
Okay, and clearly the Gulf of Aden and that surrounding area has passage of more than 2,000 ships as the.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Mr. Bansal, it's interesting as to how the bill defines piracy and the consequential punishment that it provides. So the punishment does not only extend for acts of piracy, but also attempted acts of piracy. Can you talk a little bit about that?
See, as I said, the bill is quite comprehensive while defining piracy. It also defines stateless citizens and all those issues. What it says is the punishment is that anybody who indulges in these acts will be punished by life imprisonment or death if the act of piracy or in the acts that are associated with the event results in the death of certain persons or causes bodily harm or something like that. In that sort of a situation, the punishment is the person can be punished by death as well. And to that extent, what it says is that the intent of the person is also important. If somebody had weapons or something with an intention of committing a piracy, he can be prosecuted. Or if anybody was on board that ship which indulged in an act of this sort of a thing, he'll again be. So what the government has done is that it has tried to plug all the loopholes that existed, because very often what would happen that not everybody in a pirate vessel was involved in the act of piracy. Some people were just facilitating, they're taking the ship, actually driving, and they would plead non-guilty, saying that we were actually doing a valid ops, that is, we were running the ship, or I was in the engine room looking after the engines without knowing what was happening.
Or it could also happen that pirates could take over a ship and force that ship and use that ship for piracy-related activities.
And that is what all these things have been catered for in this particular bill. It actually caters for all sorts of eventualities, whether in Indian waters, outside Indian waters. However, it precludes certain things. One is that nothing will be done on a foreign ship unless, of course, the government to which the ship belongs or the crew of the ship actually appeals to India to intervene. But besides that, it will be done. And of course, like is the international convention, all warships are exempted from the provisions of this particular act.
Admiral, another important aspect of the bill is the definition of pirate ship. And, we have also seen recent incidents where, there is a mothership and then, pirates use that as a base and, take smaller crafts and go onto ships. So does the bill cover these kind of scenarios also when it defines pirate ships?
Yes, it does. It also says that any other ship or aircraft which is facilitating the act of piracy. So this mothership context that you made is a very important one, because that had become the most used method of doing this act. A mothership will come and park itself somewhere, either float, either anchor if it is in shallow water, or it just keeps drifting. And these small skiffs come out of it and they go and attack them. So this bill will actually cover all these eventualities, as Alok Bansal just mentioned.
Okay, Mr. Bansal, you were smiling when I was talking about pirate ships. You want to add something?
No, nothing. As I said, the act actually defines pirate ship very clearly, and the definition is very important. And why I am trying to say definition is very important, because historically, as I said, piracy was a very complex issue, where a lot of states used piracy as a means of state policy. Like we have now certain states using non-state actors as a important ingredient of their state foreign policy. In the past, we had states using piracy as an instrument of their state policy. So this bill defines very clearly, and it says, I would like to quote it here, that a pirate ship or aircraft means a ship or aircraft which is intended by the person in dominant control to be used for the purposes of committing any of the acts referred to above. That is what is important is the dominant control. See, very often what happens, it's a harmless ship, it's a passenger ship, or it's a fishing trawler which is going. But somebody has occupied it for that particular movement and has actually threatened to use it. And I think all these things have been included. It is also includes that has been used to commit any such act. But it was used earlier, at that moment it is not doing, but since it was involved at that stage, it will still be called a pirate ship.
Okay. Admiral, sir, if we step away from the law for a minute, how does, when piracy happens, what is the response mechanism, by the government or by the Indian Navy that actually happens on the sea?
See, right now, the ships are quite independent to take the individual action. However, the captains of the ships who are aware of these regulation hurdles, they are just a little bit more careful in doing what they do. They respond because the ship being hijacked, they have got a proper code which they start transmitting on, and all the ships, particularly the warships and particularly the ones who are on patrol, they have the receiver equipment and they know where it is. Then we also have this maritime piracy reporting centers. They immediately get to know, they pick up these transmissions either through the satellite or through high frequency communication or maybe VHF communication, and immediately alert the ships which are in the vicinity of that, because they are the ones who have a very comprehensive picture of what is happening. And thereafter, they request the nearest ship to go and help. And if there is a warship in the vicinity, then warships are, to be honest, ethically they are supposed to respond to save people's life and property. But now it has given some more room to the the captains of the ship, that they should go ahead and do the right thing without worrying too much about proving that they were right. So right now it requires a proof. You have to video everything, you have to do all that. Possibly here maybe the audio, the talk between two ships and the pirate ships, that will probably be effective, that will count.
And Mr. Bansal, so what happens to the pirate ship? The law, I think, has a provision for search and seizure. So in cases, the pirates are captured and the ship is then seized, or?
See, what is very important is this act actually gives that you can confiscate the property, and very often what would happen is that the pirates would come and you sometimes the goods looted etc. could not be recovered, and you had pirates without actually, and you had to keep feeding them, keeping them in jails, and recovery, the procedure was not there because the ship actually originally belonged to somebody else. At the time of crime, that had been taken over by those people. So I think it has made provisions for recovery of whatever the damages are, the cost, etc. by, I think, attaching the property of the pirates, and any worthwhile goods that they may have can be attached, and we could actually try and extract the losses of the state or try and make good whatever has been done.
Okay, Mr. Sinha, we are almost on the concluding part of the show. So if you think of impact, what is the impact of this particular bill on, let's say, merchant shipping, either by Indian vessels or by other vessels?
I think the, India's maritime outreach is going to help that, because if it becomes a public, it becomes an act, they will request probably their governments as well to have some law like this. But certainly India is the first country, possibly, to my knowledge, to enact these kind of regulations. So it also indicates that India's reach in the maritime domain has widened, and it is ready to provide maritime security to all the trade. So confidence building measure, India's stature itself is going to go up to a certain extent.
Okay. Mr. Bansal, final comments from you from the show?
See, India is the largest maritime power in the Indian Ocean region as far as the littoral navies are concerned, and I think as a growing navy which has responsibility, a regional power, we have certain responsibilities towards neighbor, towards the region. And I think anti-piracy is one of the missions which I think all countries of the world are globally committed. We have signed UNCLOS. And this is a very, very important facet, because till now, one of the big problems was of the Indian Navy did not have that sort of a jurisdiction to indulge in this sort of an act. I think this clearly defines that Indian naval warships have the right to rise of seizure in case of anti-piracy, etc. And I think this gives countries in our vicinity, neighborhood confidence into us, and as has been the case in past, they would seek solace from us in case of any problems. And I think countries of Indian Ocean region will be approaching Indian Navy and India to provide succor to them in case of any piracy or such related incidents.
And with that, it's time for us to end the show. Thank you, Mr. Bansal and Admiral Sinha, for joining us on the discussion. You can watch the shows on the RSTV page of YouTube. We will be back with a new issue and a new episode. Keep watching Rajya Sabha TV.